Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream where we're going to be going over the calorie deficit sweet spot. But again, before I do go into this stream, I do want to share my website here on screen. So if you're not aware, of course, I do offer online fitness coaching. And this is my website that I wanted to share with you guys so that you know how to access it before I do get into our stream. So on my website, all you have to do is search bponlinefitness.com and it'll pull up my site. Now, it's going to look a little bit different on your phone, but you'll basically see the same on your phone as well as on the main website. So I have a little bit of information on here on, the Facebook group, of course, joining the group. You can watch the latest live stream here on the homepage as well. I share a little bit about the services that I offer. And then, of course, down here you can book your consultation as well. The consultation is, of course, free. And then there's additional information where you can sign up and subscribe to the email newsletter and things of that nature. So I did want to share this. Again, guys, when you go in here, there's other resources as well. I do have a fitness blog that I upload to here on my website each and every Friday. And then, of course, I do try to keep an archive of some of the videos that I've done recently as well. So this is all the stuff that you can access here on the website. If you go on here too, you can go to program info and it'll tell you a little bit sort of about how I sort of give you an idea on how my program is structured. So there's information on how the program is structured as far as the design of the program, basically the tools you'll receive in the program and things of that nature. So you get access to all of that here on the website. So again, guys, I just wanted to share this. I am offering still 20% off online fitness coaching. So again, if you're interested, just click on the join the team button and you can go through and of course do the top form here on screen and schedule your consultation and I will reach out to you. So just wanted to show that with you guys. But let's go ahead and get started with today's stream, where we're going to be focusing on discussing the calorie deficit sweet spot. So, in this particular stream, of course, we're going to hone in on nutrition. And nutrition is a really big concept that is important to get a grasp on in a lot of different ways, especially when we're focusing on a fitness-based workout routine and, really wanting to have our workouts to complement our nutrition at the same time. So, we're going to be going over the calorie deficit sweet spot. So there's a bunch of different points that I'm going to be going over in this particular topic and discussing with you guys today. So these are the points that we're sort of going to discuss as we go throughout the stream here today. So we're going to be going over what the sweet spot actually is, the number one scoreboard performance, not just the scale, how big should the deficit be, and more. And then the two big deficit red flags, as well as why bigger deficits backfire, and then diet breaks and refeeds, strategic tools, not cheat days, and more. So we're going to go over all of these different points in this particular stream today. And there will be a few other points that I'll discuss. But again, guys, if you have any questions about anything in these streams, feel free to reach out and let me know. I'm willing to answer any questions that you may have and really give you a little bit more insight on, how I can help you to accomplish your fitness goals. Again, my business is really about, helping people to reach their goals and especially, with my philosophy as a trainer into making that approachable for especially people that feel left out when it comes to fitness. So that is my main focus with what I'm doing, and the reason that I do these streams is to give you information and knowledge that you can make use of. This isn't just something that I'm throwing out. This is stuff that you can make use of. So let's start with what the sweet spot actually is when we're talking about a calorie deficit. So I want to explain what a calorie deficit is first before we really go a little bit further. So a calorie deficit is basically when you're consuming less calories than, you would basically consume from your maintenance calories. So your maintenance calories is basically the calories that you consume where it allows you to maintain your body weight as it is. But a calorie deficit is basically under those maintenance calories. So you're consuming less. And like what I mentioned, when we're focusing on muscle gain, usually with muscle gain, we're in a calorie surplus or caloric surplus, which means we're consuming more calories than what our maintenance is to maintain our current weight. So with a calorie deficit, you're primarily, of course, lowering your intake, but you're focusing on, fat loss as your main goal, usually with, a caloric deficit. So a sweet spot, of course, or what is the sweet spot actually is a moderate sustainable calorie shortfall that drives steady fat loss while preserving performance, recovery, and muscle. Like what I mentioned with the calorie deficit, you're primarily focusing on, fat loss as your main goal. That's not to say that you can't, preserve muscle, but it's how you strategically, sort of do that deficit that's going to help with preserving that muscle efficiently. So progress is steady and not dramatic. Weight measurements trend down over weeks with normal daily noise. So training stays strong, your strength and workout quality are mostly maintained. Your hunger is manageable yet noticeable, but not constant, obsessive, or binge triggering. So hunger can, happen, of course, if you're in a deficit because you're consuming, again, below your body weight. So keep that in mind. Recovery still works. So your sleep, your mood, and energy are mostly okay day to day. And adherence is high. You can execute it on weekdays and weekends without chaos. So your nutrition is staying consistent, you're staying in that calorie deficit, and you're also able to manage your hunger and your recovery efficiently at the same time. So that's where your sweet spot is. So what you need to think about, as far as, staying within that sweet spot and really being able to maintain that calorie deficit without it sort of affecting your results and also affecting your performance in your workout, you need to keep some of these points in mind, sort of understanding your performance, not just based on the scale itself. So keep in mind that water retention can swing weight at least 1 to 5+ pounds easily. So don't get hung up on the scale. And this is something that I mentioned to all of my clients or any potential clients that may join onto the program because we do get hung up on the scale and we don't tend to think about all of the other sort of factors that play into reaching our goals. Sodium, carbs, and soreness can also, of course, have an effect. So, stress, sleep can make changes to how the scale sort of responds. So, again, that scale is going to change based on various different factors. So, don't focus solely on it. The scale can move up even when fat loss is happening. So, fat loss doesn't have to happen just based on, the pounds on the scale. So keep that in mind. So here are some 5 big performance markers to sort of keep in mind as you are staying in that calorie deficit, again, going below your maintenance calories. And the way that I want to mention too, maintenance calories are basically, again, the calories on where we can maintain our current body weight. So whatever those calories are that's allowing you to maintain your current body weight, and it's at sort of a steady level, that's how you sort of identify those what the maintenance calories are. So generally, like what I've mentioned, when we're focusing on, muscle gain, a lot of times we focus on consuming, nutrients roughly around our body weight. So generally, and this is just for muscle gain, so it's a little bit different when we're focusing on, a calorie deficit and fat loss. For muscle gain, generally we want to focus on 1 gram to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So that's generally what you focus on with muscle gain when it comes to, staying within your goal to gain extra muscle or, to lead to hypertrophy, in other words. So generally, when we're thinking about maintenance calories, it's sort of in that same range where if we're maintaining, because again, like with protein intake, you're going above, so you're increasing how much protein you're intaking in order to help with that muscle gain. And it's almost the same concept when we're talking about calorie intake, where whatever your calorie intake that is allowing you to maintain your current weight, that's sort of what you need to identify as your maintenance calories. And I may discuss a little bit further in the future how we can really sort of hone in and understand what our maintenance calories are. So let's go over the big five performance markers. So strength trend. So what you need to think about is, are key lifts stable or improving, or are you seeing those changes going in the right direction? Are you on the right trajectory for progression? So it doesn't have to skyrocket while cutting, but it should not free fall. So when you're in a calorie deficit, again, you're going to have less nutrients than you would normally because you're focusing on fat loss. So you can kind of have a difference in your strength because you're consuming less calories. So you kind of have to monitor that. Your rep quality and control, so your tempo, your range of motion, from form are staying locked in. So those are staying consistent as you're going throughout your workouts and you're still staying in that calorie deficit. Your work capacity, can you handle similar volume without feeling destroyed? So if you can still have that, efficient amount of volume in the workouts that you're doing, if you're still able to sort of stay in that sufficiently, then that means you're on the right track even when you're in that calorie deficit. Recovery signals. So sleep quality, soreness, duration, mood, and energy. If they stay elevated and one is not sort of overtaking the other, then you're in the right, right on the right track, in other words. Consistency and adherence. So are you able to show up repeatedly without burning out? So again, the reason why you need to focus so much more on your nutrition when you're in a calorie deficit is because it can change a little bit of your performance in your workouts if you're not smart with how you approach your nutrition. Because, when you are low in specific nutrients, it can, of course, change your energy levels. A lot of times, what I mentioned when we're focusing on, basically, like if somebody's focusing on a low carb diet, what you generally see from somebody that's in a low carb diet is they're going to be more lower on energy and they're not going to be, sort of at that peak performance level where they're, energized and ready to go. So if you're in sort of that diet where you're lower in carbs, you're going to notice that shift. So when you are lower in specific nutrients, you're going to notice a change in how you're going to feel. So keep that in mind. So let's go over next how big your deficit should be, or should the deficit be in more? So the big idea is to aim for a deficit that drives fat loss. So without crushing performance, sleep, and recovery. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. If you're, and like what I mentioned before, a lot of times I generally focus on gearing, a lot of content based on muscle gain. But I think fat loss is just as important to have as a goal. And it's something that, it's important to be aware of that it works a little bit differently than when we're talking about muscle gain or if we're talking about more of a performance-based goal at the same time. So keep in mind that you want to aim for a deficit that drives fat loss and you don't want it to compromise your performance or your sleep and recovery. So lean performance first and lifting hard. So you want to be able to do 0.25 to 0.5% body weight per week. So most people are generally at roughly 0.5 to 0.75 body weight per week. So higher body fat, beginners up to 1.0 body fat per week. So a common starting point is roughly 500 kilocalories or calories a day, often yielding to around a pound to zero point 0.5 kilograms per week. So larger deficits are usually 500 to 100 to 1,000 kilocalories or calories a day, and it can be used at a sort of faster loss when appropriate. Health context and adherence, but bigger isn't always better. So you kind of have to keep those different points in mind as well. So with a larger deficit, again, when you're focusing on, specific types of metrics and as far as how you want to sort of, you know, approach fat loss is going to be dependent on what your goal is and, sort of where you're at in your journey as far as your finished nutrition journey itself and getting started. So again, going slightly under, 500 calories, kilocalories a day is sort of going to be the calming starting point for, that calorie deficit. So the next point I want to go over is the three biggest too big deficit red flags. So this is still kind of connected to what we sort of mentioned before when it comes to those performance markers. And this is the same sort of concept here. So what you need to keep in mind is that when you are noticing any of these points, sort of in the way, and that you're noticing basically, sorry, I'm trying to get off the screen so you can see this. So the three, so again, with the three biggest too big deficit red flags. So what you need to keep in mind is these points. If you're kind of struggling with, sort of seeing those results when it comes to fat loss. So if the performance drops, but your workouts feel heavier every week, this is something that you need to monitor because that may mean that you're having too big of a deficit with your calorie intake. So if your strength numbers stall or backslide, if your pumps disappear and your reps fall faster than usual, and if your warm-ups feel like work sets or working sets, then that needs to be something you need to think about. So if performance is trending down across multiple sessions, you're likely underfueled. So you have to keep that in mind. So that means you likely need to increase your nutrients, increase your calorie intake, your macro intake, and things of that nature. So if recovery is lagging, recovery is, your sleep, this is your stress levels and things of that nature. If recovery is lagging and soreness sticks around longer, this is something you need to monitor as well, and it may mean you need to adjust this. So your delayed onset muscle soreness, so this is muscle soreness that usually lasts between 24 to basically 72 hours post workout. And if it's lasting, you have a consistent soreness that's lasting 3 to 5 plus days consistently, then that's something that is not good to have. That means we need to really, sort of hone in on what the issue is. If sleep quality is worsening, so you're waking up more and you're having less deep sleep, if joints feel cranky and little aches pile up, then that means a sustainable deficit still allows you to bounce back between sessions. So you need to still have that deficit, but maybe you need to increase your intake just a little bit more, and maybe you need to monitor your recovery a little bit more as well. So this last third one, or the third one I should say here, is that if your hunger, mood, and daily energy feel out of control. So if you're feeling those different points as well, then that's when you need to sort of monitor your deficit. And if your deficit is not sort of benefiting your results. So if you're having constant food thoughts, cravings, spike late day, irritability, low motivation, or brain fog, and your NEAT collapses, your NEAT is actually known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So to define what this is, NEAT is basically when you're doing movement throughout the day that's not necessarily workouts or it's not necessarily structured exercise. So if you're doing a lot of fidgeting or if you're doing a lot of, different sort of small movements throughout the day, that's known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And that means you're doing though, you're not doing as much as that sort of fidgeting and movement throughout the day. So if you're noticing any of those as well, then that's when you need to sort of maybe adjust your deficit and adjust your intake for your nutrition and your diet overall. So why bigger deficits backfire? So again, the hardest thing I think when we're talking about fat loss is that you have to be a little bit more cautious on how you approach fat loss versus muscle gain because you have to kind of stay in a good sort of middle ground, as far as your deficit. Your deficit has to be monitored quite a bit more than a surplus when we're focusing on muscle gain. So why bigger deficits backfire? So you lose training quality, the muscle signal fades. And again, when we're getting less nutrients, that's where we're going to kind of see a difference in, you know, that sort of, performance in our workouts. So strength and reps drop, less mechanical tension. This means that you're not activating the muscles as effectively. More fatigue and less output, weaker hypertrophy stimulus. Forms break form breaks down, leading to a higher risk of energy, or excuse me, injury. Higher energy in injury risk. I don't know why I say energy and injury the same. So if you see that, just kind of monitor that as well. So your body fights back with adaptation. So NEAT again drops. So you're not moving as much. You move less without noticing. Metabolic downshift over time, which is energy conservation. Hormones and recovery take a hit, which become harder to sustain. You can also lose more lean mass than you need to. So too little fuel is leading to too much stress, which is going to lead to muscle loss risk. So even though we're focusing on fat loss, we still have to emphasize, conserving and, basically sustaining muscle at the same time. We don't want to cut down on muscle. So protein can't fully save you if your deficit is too extreme. So again, you got to have a good balance with your deficit. Your body pulls from muscle when recovery is compromised. So if you're not having sufficient nutrients, your body is basically pulling what it already has. So you're, compromising that muscle, the muscle that you have, and it's affecting your results at the same time, and it's going to affect your performance in your workouts. So keep that in mind. So diet breaks and refeeds and strategic tools on not cheat days. So what are they? A diet break. So these are two different sort of concepts that you can, basically keep in mind when you're focusing on, maybe making a sort of minor adjustment while you're going through this deficit to give your body a little bit of basically leeway in your routine. So a diet break is usually 7 to 14 days at maintenance calories. So you're having the same food quality, you're just having more fuel. So this is basically a short period of time in, you're consuming more than you would in your normal calorie deficit. So the way that I can define this to give you a better idea on what this is this is almost like a deloading phase with nutrition. So, what a deloading phase when we're talking about workouts, this is a phase in workouts where you intentionally sort of lower your intensity in your workouts so that you're giving your body enough rest to basically prepare you for the more intense exercise that you do later on in the, coming phases. So that's kind of like what a diet break is. So you're doing 7 to 14 days at maintenance calories, same food quality again, you're still keeping that same food quality, but you're just, having more fuel. And that's if you think about it in the same thing with a deload phase, you're still doing similar workouts, but you're just lowering the intensity. Whereas with here, you're having the same food quality, but you're adding more fuel. So you're consuming more foods, but you're still in that same sort of, nutrient and macro balance. So refeed is another one where you do 1 to 3 days at maintenance or slightly above, usually higher carbs. So this is a small period of time where you're staying at that maintenance calories, but you're going slightly above and with the higher carbs. And what the higher carbs does again is going to help with energy and performance, is really going to restore that training performance. So if you kind of need a boost in, sort of your routine and you're focusing on this calorie deficit and fat loss, these are great options. So why do they work? So it restores training performance. So your glycogen is going to have better output. Again, glycogen is an energy source in the body and usually it comes from carbohydrates. It also boosts adherence, so less diet fatigue, fewer cravings. So this is again just giving you a small break in your diet where you're still going to stay consistent after this short period of time, 7 to 14 days or 1 to 3 days, but it's going to really boost that adherence and you're going to be ready to go back into your normal calorie deficit diet when this comes around. So it supports recovery and mood. Again, it's sort of helping to stabilize your sleep, your stress, and your soreness because you're sort of getting more nutrients in your body. And it's also going to help preserve lean mass by keeping the muscle signal strong. Again, because you're going to be consuming, above maintenance calories usually here or at maintenance calories, those muscles are going to get the nutrients that they need to sort of press on. So again, just keep in mind that when we're talking about this diet and refeed, it's basically like having a short sort of nutrition break in your calorie deficit where you are able to really bounce back into it after a period of time to where, it gives you more of the, more of the alertness to go into that calorie deficit again. And it's just a time to give you a break to where you're not so, overwhelmed with the deficit and trying to stay under a certain amount of calories for so long. And it's just kind of giving you that break to where you can jump back into it afterwards. So, plateaus, real versus fake, and how to troubleshoot. So, these are some other points to keep in mind as we get close to the end here. So, I want to sort of mention the difference between a fake plateau and a real plateau. So, again, what we're talking about here is primarily with talking about a calorie deficit. And again, we're talking about fat loss. So, keep in mind that this is focusing on the goal of fat loss. So this is not necessarily going to pertain specifically to muscle gain in a sense. So a fake plateau is where the scale stalls, but fat loss is still happening. So this is like what I mentioned previously is that we can kind of get into a spot to where we get so hung up on the scale that we don't really look at the larger picture. And this is something, again, that I mentioned time and time again when I do calls with potential clients as well as clients. And I mentioned that you cannot focus on the scale all the time. You do have to monitor other different metrics so that you can kind of see your progress happening in different ways. So, water retention from hard training, delayed onset muscle soreness. So, there could be inflammation. So, again, keep in mind that these are likely what's going to happen if you're in a fake plateau. So this doesn't necessarily mean you're plateauing. You're just kind of maybe feeling like you're not seeing results, but the results are happening behind the scenes. So more carbs and sodium, higher glycogen and water is not fat gain. So keep that in mind. If you're having stress and poor sleep, cortisol driven water hold, so digestive lag, so there's less output, more food volume and fiber. Again, this is mainly for women, but menstrual cycle shifts if applicable. So, if waist clothes photos are improving and weekly averages aren't rising, it's usually fake. So, you kind of have to keep that in mind that, we're focusing on, you know, our progress. It doesn't necessarily align specifically if, if we're, not measuring, if we're just solely focusing on the scale. You need to keep all of the other progress sort of metrics in mind as well. So just keep that, at the front of your mind when you're sort of feeling like you're plateauing. So a real plateau is where fat loss has truly stopped. So there's no change in the weekly scale average for 2 to 3 plus weeks, if there's no change in measurements, waist and hip, if there's no change in progress photos, and if adherence is consistent, tracking portions and weekends, then that means you're in a real plateau and you may need to make some adjustments. So if you're in a real plateau, you're going to see multiple metrics for multiple weeks that are going to stay basically level and not going to change. So that's how you're going to know if your fat loss is not, where it needs to be and you're not sufficiently losing the fat as you want. So keep that in mind, the difference between a fake plateau and a real plateau. So thank you again for your time. That's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I really appreciate your time. Again, guys, if you're interested, you can check out bponlinefitness.com for a ton of information on what I have to offer related to online fitness coaching. If you do have any questions on anything I've discussed here today, feel free to let me know. I always enjoy, again, sharing these topics and diving deep into these topics, but I would love to hear your feedback if there's anything that you would like me to discuss in the future. Thank you guys once again. I will have another live stream, of course, next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then, if you're not aware, every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, I do a TikTok live stream on, of course, various different topics related to fitness and nutrition. And I do kind of gear a lot of the content on there for beginners, but of course, anybody can make use of that as well. So definitely check that out. I will likely also be doing a live stream, likely in the future. I may start doing live streams on YouTube. Since my YouTube has really gotten quite a bit of traction, so I may be doing that in the near future, and I'll let you guys know when I decide to sort of get going with doing streams on there. But thank you guys once again for taking the time to check this stream out. I hope you found it helpful and valuable. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out and let me know. But again, I really appreciate it, guys. And I will see you guys next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time in the next live stream. So thank you guys once again for watching.